First and foremost, you're the founder of One Two Growth Studio. And I believe you're involved with a component of Hello Generalist, which is an operator community, manual override. And you describe yourself as an AI implementation expert. I'd love to dig into each one of those and figure out how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, yeah, would love to jump in. So, yeah, I guess we can start with the AI side, and go from there if that sounds good.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Yeah. So my background historically, as you said, like is very much a generalist. I've every role I've had from management consultant all the way to the main gig I've had, which is being a chief of staff, has been leveraging some of the superpowers of being a generalist, which always comes with some challenges as well. But over the last 5 years, I've been really ingrained in the AI space, both as a full-time employee as a chief of staff. I actually ran our internal AI team once ChatGPT 3.0 came out. The mandate for me was here's a team of engineers and you're going to AIify the company. So for the last 2 years of that stint, was working on both sort of the technical side of things of how do we build AI products for our own team internally to leverage this technology, but also then the change management side, which is like how do you get people to buy into this? How do you get them to think creatively with AI? And then over the last year, decided to go solo and help more companies out. Actually, not only making those changes for themselves, but then making AI a bit more practical and building those solutions for them as I've started to gain a little more technical knowledge as well. So,
Very cool. When you say generalist, I always think revenue operations are generalists, but I
mm.
think you're talking about an abstraction a little bit higher than that. In your experience, what is a generalist and what is a chief of staff? I think a lot of folks don't really know what it is.
Those are like the two toughest questions to answer. No, I'd say like a good a picture of a good generalist, I think, is someone who can solve very complex problems in a number of different ways. So whether that's people problems, technology problems, process problems, they find a way to think creatively and think critically about how to solve them and have enough skill set to get at least like 80% of the way there. But that also means that a good generalist has to know when to like delegate and find the right people to bring in how to solve a problem. And I think that kind of leans into why generalists fit into a chief of staff role is because chiefs of staff are kind of these rogue agents, at least in the tech space. Maybe in government it looks a little bit different. But in the tech space, you're kind of this rogue agent that in most cases, no one reports to you, but you have a mandate to take on these initiatives that you are supposed to get there like 70 to 80% of the way there, but you have the rest of the organization to help you get there. And it's up to you to find how do you solve this problem using all the resources available, but also understanding the constraints as well. So I think that's why like every chief of staff job description looks for management consulting and investment banking analysts and all this because they're just given pretty complex problems to solve and not a lot of room to work with, but they just find their way around solving those problems and they just have a knack for figuring out what they need to learn, how to apply it, and get the solution they need.
Okay, that's very interesting. I think right away, one of the core skill sets that would make any chief of staff successful is the ability to marshal resources as well as lead with influence, right? Because
Yes.
you don't have dotted line authority, but you do have this mandate. So building relationships and getting some support. I find that very similar to folks in revenue operations, particularly
Yeah.
revenue operations teams that have a centralized design, right? You have a VP of RevOps, and then you have all these folks underneath them. Maybe they have sub teams, and then you have the business partner out to marketing and sales in order to get things done. But you don't necessarily have direct influence over what sales and marketing do. So that's really interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about the manual override? What is
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Yeah, so it kind of spurred up from this platform called Hello Generalist, which is run by a good friend of mine, Shayna Anderson. She was actually another chief for staff, formerly at Yelp, and she was there for a number of years. And she moved into working fractionally initially, and then realized that she kind of found a pain point in the market, which was how do you find fractional people in with tech backgrounds to work at early stage tech companies. I think the fractional landscape has always been more traditional companies who are looking for like interim roles of interim CFO, COO, but there was this new sort of desire to have people who aren't necessarily full-time, but still need sort of that executive help. And so she spun up Hello Generalist, which is a platform to match early stage tech companies with operators who are going fractional and can provide those services. Manual Override is kind of a spin out of Hello Generalist, as you know, as I was actually fractional at that point when I met Shayna, and she was asking me, "Hey, like going about your fractional business, what are some of the challenges you had?" And I think we were briefly talking about like scaling challenges and sort of context switching and all of this stuff. It's a new world that not a lot of people know about. And so we figured, what if there's a way to build a very homegrown community, very similar to YC and Techstars, what they provide to startup founders, apply that same model to fractional operators. We see them as sort of the same mindset, same types of people who would go and start a tech company, but maybe they're going for a fractional business. So Manual Override is a 6 week accelerator where we help either folks who are trying to get into fractional work or those who have a fractional business try and expand it to what they want to reach. So
That's fascinating. So, okay, so a couple of things there. They're not full-time employees, they're not part-time employees. Uh, they're not consultants necessarily. Would you describe like these somewhat differently, right? Like fractional is for more executive level and above. What about the levels below that? Would that be more consulting and part-timers? How would you differentiate the flavors of potential employment that's out there?
yeah, it's I think for the Hello Generalist community and where we see a lot of the tech space is that they are looking for fractional COOs, which in a traditional sense, COOs take on a lot of different responsibilities, which are hard to scope out in one specific area, which I think is where, now that I've gone into consulting, it's very much you have a particular goal that you're helping out with or a particular project that you're helping out with. I think where we're seeing a lot of early stage companies saying, hey, I just need sort of not necessarily a co-founder, but someone who can take on more than I can scope now. And I think having someone fractional allows you to be on there for longer, without having to like rescope things all the time. Someone who can just own what internal operations looks like today and tomorrow, which I think differentiates it from maybe more junior roles where there is specific demand for a specific purpose, where it can be outlined in scope. So we definitely still see roles with like marketing manager roles and things like that on a fractional basis, but a lot more of the traditional sort of like fractional title is coming from those that are likely filling in a pretty large gap for a significant amount of time, usually longer than 3 to 6 months on a fractional basis.
That's cool. So I want to pivot back to AI a little bit. So you've been
Yeah.
given the opportunity to, go deep in AI and then bring it broadly across the business. I'm curious about some of the projects, maybe one or two projects, and maybe you and I can go deep into it. I love building AI workflows as well, incorporating AI steps inside of a workflow. I think when you hear about it on a podcast, I'm sure folks are listening to this, you hear it, but you don't really live it until you actually go into and build a workflow and have it break on you, right?
Yeah.
Uh, or you figure out how to do a particular skill. So I'm curious about some of the projects that you've been working on.
Yeah, yeah. Some of them have one of the most specific go-to-market ones, for example, is one team that I work with on a sort of retainer basis as an AI consultant was trying to move from a PLG motion to a sales-led motion, or more specifically, they were sort of a consumer app and they wanted to now sell this to larger teams. So they now have a change in ICP, a change in their messaging, a change in how the product is sold and operates. And they're a very small team, and they wanted to, before actually like bringing on a full sales team, kind of test out, would this actually work? Does this resonate with the market? So, the traditional way of doing that would be going and having conversations with customers, but they still had an inflow of people who they think were their ICP, but using it in a different context. So, um, one of the workflows we did was basically start to say, okay, how can we take the existing large user base they have and start to go through that, either historically or new leads that came through, and start to think about how do we do research on these folks quickly? How do we qualify them quickly? How do we draft really spotted, unique messaging that's not just a generic sequence, and then how do we actually get that sequence out into people's inboxes? So it was a very standard flow of things, but where we brought AI in was kind of unique in how it did the research, how it thought about prompting, perplexity for, uh, you know, really qualified sources of information. And then actually how we use sequence builders looks very chaotic now, or it doesn't look real, because every sequence for every new user is so unique now because it's AI generated. And it's not just AI variables that are being used, it's the entire three-step sequence is now completely unique for every user that gets involved. So it's kind of this disruption of how we traditionally think about using these tools and kind of breaking it for complete customization with AI in the go-to-market space. So
So let's break out some of your toolkit a little bit. What are some of the
yeah,
tools? Feel free to name names here of companies.
yeah,
Obviously not paid promotion for any of these companies, but what are some of the tools that you use readily at the helm?
yeah. So all of the agent and workflow building I do in N8N. I just find it's a bit more technical than like the Zapiers and the Makes, but it gives a bit more flexibility for me to use other external tools within there. So that's sort of the foundation layer of how this works. The trigger points for how this all kicks off is also just through a Slack channel. So that's how a lot of the messaging happens. But any of the research that we do or qualification goes through Perplexity, through an AI agent that has a Perplexity tool to be able to prompt Perplexity on its own, which is pretty fascinating to have one AI agent that runs on like Gemini call on Perplexity. It's kind of interesting there.
Oh,
And then we
right.
also
So
use
you use the Gemini to determine the dynamic prompt, which then
correct.
goes into, okay. Otherwise, you'd have a rigid prompt inside your text input. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so the AI agent's first step is to actually come up with a prompt for Perplexity. And then we also use, depending on the depth of understanding from the Perplexity prompt, if it needs to go and use Exa.ai, which is actually the company that does a lot of the what OpenAI uses for deep research, I believe, is through Exa. But Exa is very similar in that it's kind of similar to Perplexity. It's probably a bit more in depth in citing sources and such. So we use all that for basically qualifying who this person is and the company that they're at. And then we have another AI agent that basically criteria is this person qualified for sort of sales-led product versus just an individual product. So that's sort of the first step. The next step through the sort of email crafting and messaging side, we use Firecrawl, which is sort of a web scraper that is really well suited for LLMs to use. And funnily enough, we actually scrape our own homepage every time. People are like, why do you do that every time? And it's primarily because it allows our marketing brains, whenever we want to change messaging on the website, it will always be reflected in tandem with the sales-led motion. So if we're changing how we're positioning the product on the website, uh, anytime a sales email is going out, it's likely aligned with that messaging as well. So there's no disconnect there. But Firecrawl's a great one for just scraping either their home website to understand what their products are doing or what their positioning is, or your own web pages in a really nice format using natural language. And then the sequencing and such is done with reply.io. It's just legacy, what they've been using, allows us to send in dynamic whole subjects and bodies and sequences and things like that. And then there's also like human in the loop components. So we actually never allow AI to send anything without our without our okay. So N8N has some nice human in the loop components that allow us to it sort of drafts everything up, packages it for us nicely, and then we approve every sequence that goes out.
Okay, and then that review and approval happens on the N8N side through a console, or is it done in Slack or email?
It actually sends us a Gmail email to my inbox and it gives me the reasoning of why this person was qualified in a paragraph, and then all the three emails that would go out in the sequence, so I can kind of read through. And if I reject it, I can actually give a message back, and it will loop through the drafting cycle with my feedback if needed. But it's gotten to the point where it's pretty good enough where I don't need to give it feedback. So
Okay, so the feedback is you reply back to the N8N agent. And
yeah.
then you have another step that waits for a webhook if an email comes in. And then if it's good to go, do you just copy and paste it and create a new email and send it out, or is that a different
No,
step?
Yeah, so it's able to with the setup in reply.io, you can there's custom fields that we have for every person, and those custom fields are basically there's nine of them, or no, six of them, sorry, which is like subject line for email one and body for email two, and so on, or body for email one, we do that for every email, so they have six custom fields that they have on that contact. And then when you set up the sequence, what you do is whenever someone's entered in, basically the dynamic variable within reply.io, the subject is that custom field and the body is that custom field. So when you're actually setting up the sequence, it looks like there's just two stranded variables, but when it's actually processed through, all the approved sequence gets added to those custom fields and processed through. So um, it's that's where we kind of break the point of what a sequence should be. The only reason we're using sequencing is so that if someone replies back, we are not sending, steps two and three with obviously ignoring replies and such. So, yeah, it's we can't really look at sequence statistics very well, or in the traditional sense, given how custom they are. So,
Cool. Well, if they have a CRM, and all
yeah.
the emails are flowing in, you could go do some cleanup on
Mhm.
the record side. Okay, that's very interesting. So that's a very go-to-market.
Yeah.
I'm curious about some of the initial results on the experimentation that you're seeing from, going putting this into production.
Yeah, it's we probably I'd say the amount of time we now spend on sales efforts is significantly lower. Um, Primarily given again the sort of uh, it goes back to the success criteria here, which is this actually resonating with people more or less than our initial product? And what we're learning from is that this system with very minimal time is still booking the same amount of meetings and the same amount of interest as we were when we were adding in hours. So the payback in itself is it's at least allowing us to now build more products and uh, more applications within sort of the actual product that needs to change based on some of these conversations that we're having. So we're able to trade the time that we were committing to crafting all this stuff and doing research now into, hey, we're hearing all this from new conversations. Let's actually build products that match that, it's kind of changed the game of we've learned that the initial product needs to evolve and for it to be a sales-led motion. And so that's sort of the payoff here is that we've now built a system that allows us to have these conversations and build the right stuff rather than trying to force, a product into the market itself. So,
So I don't want to dig into any more projects. Though, do you want to go abstract it a little higher, right? Like the genesis for a desire to have something like this in place, pretty clear cut, and then the delivery of building the actual system. But then there's the actual like design, gathering
mm,
requirements, testing. So you came from a management consulting background, so did I. I usually typically think through a traditional waterfall method where you're gathering requirements, well, you're defining the problem, gathering requirements, putting together a design. Then from there, you're building out the technical specs and configuration, going through a build in a traditional UAT, and then going live. That's very rigid. In fact, it takes a very long time for any project to launch if
mm,
you do it that way. The other method is to have an agile methodology where you're just launching small featurettes quickly, quickly as possible. I'm curious when you were going through a lot of these builds, are you living with a hybrid of the two? Are you on one camp versus the other? Like, how do you traditionally work with your clients from ideation to launch?
yeah, I typically put some sort of time frame from ideation to launch of like 2 weeks. And that's just like they're
Quick.
almost thought of like sprints of like workflows, right? So we want to if the concept that I hear from a lot of people, if I work on the go-to-market side, is we want a full end-to-end research to qualification. And I would say that's great. But you're probably going to need to chunk this up into different segments, and we can define, I think to the point, it's a bit of a hybrid approach in that it doesn't have to be as well structured as what you allowed it before. I think the key things are, or the most important thing is like understanding what success looks like for that, because you can just spin this stuff up and it can technically work, but how do you evaluate if this is working in the right way? So I really work with my clients is like over the next 2 weeks, we're going to have this goal of this thing is going to be up and running, but it's also going to have a success criteria of the following 2 weeks to reach, whatever it may be. in terms of meetings booked or time saved, whatever it might look like. And so as you kind of piece those together over that structured build, you're allowing people to get an understanding of what this new way of working with AI looks like. That if you were to scope out the whole thing, it probably looks a little bit different if you were to scope it piece by piece, because people start to get an understanding like, oh, if it can do this and it does it that well, maybe we can branch off and do something a little bit different than we would traditionally do. So I definitely like to do sort of chunked up sprints of building a larger project together so that people can kind of see how it operates over time. People think that looks clunky and can be risky, but that's if it's scoped poorly. So as long as you take the time to think about success criteria, you think about what does success look like at the end of this larger project, and you're constantly building towards that, almost like having an OKR for each one, then you should be in a good position to be able to build something over time.
That's super fascinating. Um, so coming to think of, you mentioned Exa and Perplexity and
Mhm.
Firecrawl. That's a pretty intensive research. Are there levels of research, like the company level, the individual level, maybe the end customer, the product, like who they sell to? Like what's this cascade of knowledge that you're trying to build, or a matrix of knowledge that you're trying to build for, the specific outputs that you're going for on a go-to-market context?
Yeah, so the main perplexity and Exa side of things is really, I think this goes to the point of why I like the sort of DIY or DFY approach to building with AI is that the most important part of the context behind the prompts or the majority of the prompt is actually explaining our business or the product that we're trying to sell more than generic do some research on this thing because it then influences what type of research is going to be done. So for example, this product that I've been helping out with sells to venture capital firms. But there's so much differentiation of like types of venture capital firms, how large is their portfolio, all of these different criteria that if you use the generic tool to use that research, you'd probably get some basic answer. But if we're able to explain the pain point that our product actually does, how it works within the prompt every time, it's going to do really specific research on there. So that's why we go to that level of depth to make it feel like we are actually the ones doing the research as much as possible. So that's really the most important part with using any of these tools is it can look quite intense, but the point is to make sure that it is acting as if you were doing the research, not just doing generic research overall. Because we could basically, if you went with generic research, every VC firm would be a fit, but we know that's not the case. So we bring in those nuances, and that gets brought into and captured into the level of research that we do. So they're intense tools, but I'd say the intensity comes with the input we give to the tools rather than the expected output. We're not looking for like 20-page reports on every person that signs up for a product, but we want to give it enough context so that it can actually prompt the right types of research to do.
I love that. So I always ask this at the end of the show, what's one piece of advice that you'd like to leave to maybe not only the go-to-market community, but perhaps a generalist community?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for traditional playbooks of how we solve problems or go about doing things like go to market. There's room for those playbooks to be broken or at least completely customized for your business. Most of the AI use cases that I work on and get used to are seen as extremely unique for those businesses, and it works for them because they have a defined success criteria that they have, and we build for that success criteria. We don't build for what should be done. And so I think there's so much more flexibility and layers that you can build into the way you want to operate with AI that I think there's a lot more, a lens of creativity and flexibility that can be brought to more traditional playbooks of how you should do go to market. I think that question now looks different and unique for everyone and can be a reality. So.
Well, Harry, for those who want to connect with you and learn more about One Two Growth Studio, where can they go ahead and do so?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best place. I try and post content on there about how I work most often there. Or my website, 12growth.com is another good source. And yeah, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or email at harry at 12growth.com.
Amazing. Thanks, Harry.
Thank you very much.